The cold spring night wrapped around Virginia Bennett like a shroud, as she clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest, desperately trying to keep the child warm beneath her threadbare shawl. The auction block in Silver Creek, Colorado loomed ahead, a grim silhouette against the fading light of 1876. She'd come too far to turn back now, 300 miles from the plantation where she'd escaped after her husband's murder, with nothing but a stolen horse, $10, and her precious baby girl. Virginia pulled the edge of her shawl across her daughter's face as she approached the gathering crowd. The baby auction was the town's solution to orphans and children whose families couldn't provide for them. But Virginia wasn't here to give up her child, she was here to find passage. Rumor had it that wealthy ranchers came to these auctions looking not just for children to adopt, but for workers and occasionally wives. "Papers, madam?" A gruff voice startled her as a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose blocked her path. "I'm just watching," Virginia stammered, backing away slightly. Her accent still tinged with Louisiana Creole despite her efforts to disguise it made the man raise an eyebrow. "No watching. This is for serious business, either you're selling or buying." His eyes narrowed, taking in her tattered dress and the concealed bundle in her arms. "What you got there, woman?" he demanded, reaching for the shawl. Virginia turned away sharply. "Please, sir, I'm just looking for work. I heard the Crawford Ranch might be hiring." "Crawford don't hire through me, and certainly not women with secrets." He grabbed at her shawl, revealing the face of her 6-month-old daughter, whose dark curls and caramel skin told a story Virginia had been trying to hide. Gasps rippled through the nearby onlookers. In Silver Creek, a mixed-race child meant questions, judgment, and danger. "I'll give you $20 for the little pickaninny," called a voice from the crowd, a well-dressed woman with a pinched face. "My kitchen could use another hand in a few years." Virginia's heart pounded against her ribs. "She's not for sale," she said, voice trembling but firm as she tried to rewrap her daughter's face. "30, called another voice. "I said she's not for sale." Virginia's voice rose, drawing more attention. The auctioneer approached, grabbing Virginia's arm. "You're disrupting my business, woman. Either put her up proper or get out." "Let her go." The command cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Deep and steady, it carried the weight of authority without being raised. The crowd parted, revealing a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but Virginia could see the sun-weathered skin and the unwavering blue eyes that fixed on the auctioneer. "Samuel Crawford," someone whispered. The auctioneer's grip loosened immediately. "Mr. Crawford, I was just explaining our procedures to this woman." Samuel Crawford dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to respect. As he approached, Virginia noticed the pistol at his hip and the star pinned to his vest, the sheriff's badge. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Are you trying to sell your child?" Virginia clutched her daughter tighter. "Never, I would die first." Something in her voice must have convinced him because his expression softened. He turned to the auctioneer. "This auction's concluded for tonight, but Mr. Crawford, I said it's done." His tone left no room for argument. The crowd began to disperse, grumbling about the interruption. The woman who had offered $30 shot Virginia a venomous look before turning away. Samuel Crawford turned back to Virginia. "You're new to Silver Creek." It wasn't a question, but Virginia nodded anyway. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" She hesitated, unwilling to admit that she'd slept in a stable the previous night. "I thought not." He glanced at her baby, whose face was once again hidden beneath the shawl. "Follow me." Virginia stayed rooted to the spot. "Why would I go anywhere with you?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Because, madam, it's going to rain in about an hour and you and that little one need shelter. I'm not offering anything improper. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, has a room above the kitchen. It's yours for the night." As if to confirm his prediction, thunder rumbled in the distance. Virginia's baby stirred, whimpering softly. "No one will ever hurt you again," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Either of you. You have my word on that." Perhaps it was exhaustion or desperation or something in those steady blue eyes, but Virginia found herself nodding. "Just for tonight," she said. Samuel Crawford smiled a real smile this time and offered his arm. "Just for tonight," he agreed, though something in his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than she did. Virginia awkwardly shifted her baby to one arm, hesitating before lightly placing her hand on his offered elbow. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the chill in the air. "I'm Samuel Crawford," he said as they walked toward his horse. "Most folks call me Sheriff Crawford, but you can call me Samuel." "Virginia," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Virginia Bennett." "And this is Elizabeth." As if recognizing her name, the baby's hand emerged from the shawl, tiny fingers grasping at the air. Samuel reached out, letting the small hand wrap around his finger. "Pleased to meet you both," he said, his voice gentler than Virginia would have expected from a man of his stature. "Let's get you home before that storm hits." As Virginia mounted the horse with Samuel's assistance, baby Elizabeth secure in her arms, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man this cowboy sheriff really was, and whether his promise of safety was one he could actually keep. The Crawford Ranch sat on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a sprawling property that took Virginia's breath away as they approached. The main house stood proud against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with welcoming light. Several outbuildings and a large barn completed the homestead, with pastures stretching beyond as far as she could see. "It's been in my family for 3 generations," Samuel explained as he helped her down from the horse. "My grandfather claimed the land back in '32, before Colorado was even a territory." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a stern mouth. "Samuel Crawford, what in heaven's name?" The woman stopped short when she saw Virginia and the bundle in her arms. "Oh my, Mrs. Winters, this is Virginia Bennett and her daughter Elizabeth. They'll be staying with us tonight." The way Samuel said it left no room for discussion, though Mrs. Winters didn't seem inclined to argue. "Of course they will," she said, ushering Virginia inside. "The poor dears look half frozen. Come in, come in. I'll heat some soup and prepare the room." Virginia stepped into the warmth of the house, momentarily overwhelmed by the comfort it offered after weeks of hardship. The main room was simply but tastefully furnished, with a large stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and bookshelves filled with volumes that suggested Samuel Crawford was more educated than the average frontier sheriff. "Thank you," Virginia managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is very kind," Mrs. Winters waved away her thanks. "Kindness is in short supply these days. We do what we can." She peered at the bundle in Virginia's arms. "May I see the little one?" Hesitantly, Virginia pulled back the shawl, revealing Elizabeth's face. The baby blinked sleepily, her caramel skin and dark curls unmistakable in the lamplight. Virginia tensed, waiting for the disapproval or disgust she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, Mrs. Winters smiled warmly. "She's beautiful." "How old?" "6 months," Virginia replied, relief washing over her. "A good age. Alert but not yet too mobile." Mrs. Winters turned to Samuel. "I'll heat that soup and prepare the room. You explain to Miss Bennett how things work around here." As Mrs. Winters bustled off toward what Virginia assumed was the kitchen, Samuel gestured to one of the chairs by the fire. "Please sit. You must be exhausted." Virginia sank into the chair, cradling Elizabeth against her chest. The baby was awake now, looking around with curious eyes. Samuel took the chair opposite her, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. Without the hat shadowing his features, Virginia could see him clearly for the first time, the strong jaw covered with a neatly trimmed beard, the straight nose that had been broken at least once, and those intensely blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "I should explain about the auction," he said, his expression darkening. It's not something I approve of, but as sheriff, I can only enforce the laws, not change them. Most of the children there are truly orphans or from families that can't feed another mouth. The alternative is often worse. Worse than being sold to strangers. Virginia couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Sometimes, yes. Samuel's gaze drifted to the fire. Last winter, we found 3 children frozen to death in an abandoned mine shaft. Their mother had died of consumption and their father had simply left them. At least the adopted ones have food and shelter. Virginia looked down at Elizabeth, unable to imagine abandoning her under any circumstances. I would never give her up. Never. I believe you, Samuel said quietly. Which raises the question of what you were doing at that auction. Virginia hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. This man had shown her kindness, but she'd learned the hard way that kindness could be withdrawn as quickly as it was offered. I needed work, she finally said. I heard the large ranches sometimes hired through the auction master, I thought. She trailed off, the plan sounding foolish now that she said it aloud. You thought you could find employment and keep your child, Samuel nodded. Not unreasonable, but risky. Particularly with a child of mixed heritage, Virginia stiffened. Her father was my husband, we were legally married. I meant no offense, Samuel said quickly. But surely you know that counts for little in many places, even now, I know. Virginia's voice softened as she stroked Elizabeth's cheek. My husband was killed 3 months ago, lynched by men who didn't believe a black man should own land, even if that land was legally purchased. They burned our home with everything we owned inside it. She looked up, meeting Samuel's gaze. I ran because they wanted her to, said they'd fix the mistake of her birth. Samuel's jaw tightened, and for a moment Virginia saw a flash of cold fury in his eyes. Where was this? Louisiana, near New Orleans. You've come a long way, not far enough if they find us. Samuel leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Bennett, Virginia, no one will hurt either of you while you're under my protection. I can promise you that. Before Virginia could respond, Mrs. Winters returned. The soup's warming and the room is ready. But first, this little one needs a proper bath, and so do you, my dear. She turned to Samuel. Out with you now, women's business. Samuel rose, placing his hat back on his head. I need to make my rounds anyway, I'll be back for supper. He paused at the door, looking back at Virginia. Remember what I said, you're safe here. After he left, Mrs. Winters led Virginia to a small but clean bathroom off the kitchen where a copper tub had been filled with steaming water. Bath first, then food, then rest. Everything looks better after those 3. As Virginia bathed Elizabeth, marveling at the luxury of warm water and soap, she found herself thinking about Samuel Crawford and his promise of safety. She'd heard promises before from her father, from her husband, from supposed friends. All had been broken, one way or another. Yet something about the quiet authority in Samuel's voice made her want to believe him. Perhaps it was foolish after everything she'd been through, but as she cradled her clean, sweet-smelling daughter, Virginia allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the place where they finally stopped running. Later, as she sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of hearty vegetable soup, Mrs. Winters proved to be a fountain of information about Samuel Crawford. Been sheriff for 5 years now, the housekeeper explained as she kneaded dough for tomorrow's bread. Before that, he fought in the war Union side, of course, came back different like most did but better than some, never married though not for lack of offers. She gave Virginia a pointed look. The Crawford name means something in these parts. Samuel's father built this ranch into one of the most successful in Colorado before he passed, and Samuel's only improved it since. If he's so wealthy, why be sheriff? Virginia asked, genuinely curious. Mrs. Winters smiled. That's Samuel for you. Says someone has to stand for what's right, might as well be someone who can't be bought. She paused her kneading. He's a good man, Virginia. One of the few truly good men I've known in my 63 years. Virginia nodded, feeding Elizabeth a small spoonful of mashed potatoes. I'm grateful for his kindness, but we won't impose for long. I need to find work, somewhere we can build a new life." Was all Mrs. Winters said, returning to her dough with renewed vigor. That night, in the small but comfortable room above the kitchen, Virginia lay awake long after Elizabeth had fallen asleep in the makeshift crib Mrs. Winters had prepared. The storm Samuel had predicted had arrived, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the sky. In the distance, she heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of boots on the wooden floor. Samuel returning from his rounds. Voices murmured below, too quiet to make out the words, but the deep timbre of Samuel's voice was unmistakable. Virginia turned on her side, watching Elizabeth sleep peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in the dim light of the oil lamp. For the first time in months, they were warm, clean, and well-fed. For the first time since her husband's death, Virginia felt the knot of constant fear in her chest begin to loosen just slightly. "No one will ever hurt you again," Samuel had said. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Virginia found herself hoping that, against all odds, he might be right. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the small window, transforming the simple room into a haven of warmth. Virginia woke to the unfamiliar sensation of comfort, momentarily disoriented until Elizabeth's soft coos from the makeshift crib brought reality rushing back. "Good morning, my sweet girl," Virginia whispered, lifting her daughter from the crib. Elizabeth smiled, a gummy, joyful expression that never failed to warm Virginia's heart, even in their darkest moments. The scent of coffee and baking bread wafted up from the kitchen below, accompanied by the soft clatter of pots and pans. Virginia dressed quickly in her worn dress, the only one she owned, and wrapped Elizabeth in the cleanest portion of her shawl before making her way downstairs. Mrs. Winters was bustling around the kitchen, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a white cap. She looked up as Virginia entered, her face breaking into a warm smile. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd sleep the day away. Not that I'd blame you, looked like you needed the rest." She gestured to the table where a place had been set. Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." Virginia hesitated. "I should help. You've been so kind already." "Nonsense. Plenty of time for helping later. First you eat." Mrs. Winters peered at Elizabeth. "And this little one needs some milk." Samuel brought fresh cow's milk from the barn this morning. As if summoned by his name, the door opened, and Samuel Crawford stepped into the kitchen. He'd shed his sheriff's badge and gun belt, dressed now in the practical clothes of a rancher, denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a weathered leather vest. His hat was missing, revealing hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority it had the night before. "I trust you slept well," Virginia nodded, suddenly aware of her shabby appearance compared to the tidy kitchen and its well-dressed occupants. "Yes, thank you, better than I have in weeks." "Glad to hear it." Samuel moved to the stove, pouring himself a cup of coffee before taking a seat at the table. "I've been thinking about your situation." Virginia tensed, shifting Elizabeth in her arms. Here it came the revelation of what he expected in return for his kindness. Men, in her experience, rarely helped women without wanting something. "My foreman's wife used to handle the ranch accounts and correspondence," Samuel continued, seemingly oblivious to her sudden wariness. "She passed last winter and the books have been in disarray since." "Mrs. Winters mentioned you were educated," Virginia blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Yes, my father was a schoolteacher. He taught me reading, writing, mathematics, even some Latin and French." Samuel nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already guessed. "I thought as much." "Your speech is refined." He took a sip of his coffee. "I'd like to offer you a position here at the ranch, room and board for you and Elizabeth, plus a monthly wage of $20. Virginia nearly dropped her fork. $20 a month was more than many men earned, let alone a woman, especially one with her background and circumstances. "What exactly would this position entail?" she asked cautiously. "Managing the ranch accounts, handling correspondence, perhaps teaching basic reading and arithmetic to some of the ranch hands who have expressed interest in learning. Samuel set down his cup. You'd have your own quarters in the main house. There's a small suite at the east end with 2 rooms, perfect for you and Elizabeth. Mrs. Winters would assist with the baby while you're working. It sounded too good to be true. Virginia looked to Mrs. Winters, who was watching the exchange with poorly concealed satisfaction, as if this had been her idea all along. Why would you offer this to a complete stranger? Virginia finally asked. You know nothing about me. I know enough, Samuel replied. I know you're educated, intelligent, and determined to protect your child at any cost. Those are qualities I respect. He leaned forward slightly. I also know what it's like to start over with nothing. After the war, I came back to find my father dead and the ranch nearly ruined. If not for the help of others, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Virginia looked down at Elizabeth, who was contentedly gumming on a corner of the shawl. A position like this would mean stability, safety, a chance to build something for her daughter's future. Yet years of hard lessons made her hesitate. What happens when people in town realize what Elizabeth is? They won't all be as accepting as you and Mrs. Winters. Samuel's expression hardened slightly. Silver Creek is my town, Virginia. I've worked hard to ensure it's a place where the law applies equally to everyone. There are good people here, alongside the usual share of fools and bigots. The fools can be educated, and the bigots can keep their opinions to themselves or answer to me. There was steel beneath his words, a quiet confidence that spoke of battles fought and won. Virginia found herself wanting to believe him, despite her better judgment. I'd need to see these accounts before I agree, she said finally, to be sure I can actually help. Samuel's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, erasing years of care and revealing the younger man beneath. Of course, I'll show you after breakfast. He rose from the table. For now, I need to check on a new foal. Think about my offer, Virginia. It stands regardless of your answer about the accounts. After he left, Virginia turned to Mrs. Winters. Was this your idea? The older woman smiled mysteriously as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Virginia. Let's just say I might have mentioned your education. The rest was all Samuel. He's got good instincts about people. She hesitated, then added more softly, he's been alone too long. This house needs a woman's touch and a child's laughter. Mrs. Winters, if you're implying I'm not implying anything, the housekeeper interrupted, though her eyes twinkled. Just stating facts. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Later that morning, Samuel showed Virginia to a small office off the main sitting room. A large desk dominated the space, its surface covered with ledgers, loose papers, and correspondence in various stages of completion. It's worse than I thought, Samuel admitted, running a hand through his hair. Jacob, my foreman, has been trying, but numbers aren't his strong suit. Virginia set Elizabeth down on a blanket near her feet, giving the baby a wooden spoon to play with. Then she approached the desk, picking up one of the ledgers. She flipped through it, quickly assessing the chaotic entries. This is creative bookkeeping, she said diplomatically. Samuel laughed. That's a kind way of putting it. Can you make sense of it? Virginia picked up another ledger, comparing entries. Yes, I think so. It will take time to organize everything properly, but the basics are here. You've been losing money on the eastern pasture cattle. Samuel's eyebrows rose. How could you tell that so quickly? The feed costs are higher than the sale prices recorded here, Virginia explained, pointing to several entries. Unless these numbers are wrong. They're not wrong, Samuel said, looking impressed. That's exactly the problem I've been trying to identify for months. Virginia felt a small surge of pride. It had been a long time since she'd been valued for her mind rather than merely tolerated for her presence. I can help you, she said, making her decision. I accept your offer. Samuel smiled, that same transformative expression that made him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. I'm glad. You won't regret it, Virginia. As their eyes met over the cluttered desk, Virginia felt something shift between them, a moment of connection that went beyond employer and employee. She looked away first, focusing on Elizabeth, who had abandoned the spoon and was trying to roll over on the blanket. "I should start by organizing these papers," Virginia said, her voice carefully neutral. "Do you have a filing system?" If Samuel noticed her sudden withdrawal, he didn't comment on it. "Nothing formal, whatever you think best. I'll need supplies, paper, ink, filing folders if possible, make a list. I'll have Jacob pick everything up next time he goes to town." Samuel moved toward the door. "I have ranch business to attend to, but feel free to ask Mrs. Winters if you need anything." He paused at the doorway, looking back at Virginia as she began sorting papers into neat piles. "Thank you, Virginia, not just for this," he gestured at the desk, "but for trusting me enough to stay. I know that doesn't come easily for you." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Virginia with a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time, not since the early days with Elizabeth's father. It was a dangerous feeling, one she couldn't afford to indulge. "Focus on the work," she told herself firmly, turning her attention back to the ledgers. "That's all this is, just work." But as she settled into the rhythm of organizing the ranch accounts, Virginia couldn't help but wonder if she was deceiving herself. There was something about Samuel Crawford that called to her, despite all her defenses. Perhaps it was simply gratitude, or the relief of finding safety after months of fear. Or perhaps it was something more, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge, even to herself. Days turned into weeks as Virginia settled into life at the Crawford Ranch. The small suite of rooms Samuel had offered proved to be more spacious than she'd expected, a comfortable bedroom for her, a smaller adjoining room perfect for Elizabeth, and a sitting area with bookshelves that Samuel insisted on filling with volumes from his own collection. "You should have proper reading material," he'd said when she protested the generosity. "Books are meant to be shared, not hoarded." The ranch accounts slowly took shape under Virginia's careful management. She established a proper filing system, created new ledgers with clear categories for expenses and income, and began writing detailed weekly reports for Samuel to review. Her suggestions for improving profitability, particularly regarding the troublesome eastern pasture, were met with enthusiastic approval. "You have a head for business," Samuel told her one evening as they sat in his office reviewing the month's figures. "Better than mine, if I'm being honest." Virginia smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I doubt that. You built this ranch into what it is today." "With more luck than strategy," Samuel admitted. "Until now." Their working relationship had developed an easy rhythm, professional but warm. During the day, Virginia managed the accounts and correspondence, while Mrs. Winters helped with Elizabeth. In the evenings, after the baby was asleep, she and Samuel often spent an hour or two discussing ranch business before retiring to their respective rooms. It was a peaceful existence, far removed from the constant fear and hardship of the months following her husband's death. Yet Virginia couldn't quite shake the feeling that it was temporary, that eventually the fragile sanctuary she'd found would crumble, as all her safe places had before. This fear manifested most strongly whenever she ventured into Silver Creek, which she did as rarely as possible. Despite Samuel's assurances, she felt the stares and whispers when she walked down the main street with Elizabeth in her arms. Some were merely curious, others openly hostile. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Winters advised during their first trip to purchase fabric for new clothes. "Half of them are just jealous you're living at the Crawford Ranch, and the other half haven't had an original thought in decades." Virginia tried to follow this advice, but the memory of what hatred could do, of her husband's body swinging from a tree, of their home consumed by flames, made each venture into town an exercise in controlled terror. Samuel noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her with an attentiveness that was both comforting and unsettling. "You don't have to go to town if it troubles you," he told her after a particularly difficult trip when a group of men had made comments just loud enough for her to hear. "Jacob or Mrs. Winters can get whatever you need. I won't hide, Virginia said firmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she organized receipts at her desk. Elizabeth and I have done nothing wrong. Samuel studied her for a long moment. No, you haven't, and I admire your courage. He hesitated, then added, would it help if I accompanied you next time? The offer touched her more than she cared to admit. You have responsibilities as sheriff. You can't escort me every time I need thread or sugar. Perhaps not. But I can make it clear to certain individuals that my protection extends to you and Elizabeth at all times. His expression hardened. I heard about Johnson and his friends at the general store. That won't happen again. Virginia hadn't told him about the incident, how 3 men had blocked her path, making crude suggestions about where she and her little mongrel belonged. She'd managed to escape into the milliner's shop, where the owner, a kind-hearted widow named Mrs. Parker, had let her leave through the back door. How did you know about that? She asked. Mrs. Parker told me. She was concerned. Samuel's jaw tightened. I've already had a conversation with Johnson. He won't bother you again. Virginia didn't ask what that conversation had entailed. She'd seen enough of Samuel's quiet authority to imagine it had been effective. The knowledge that he was watching out for her, even when she didn't ask for help, brought a warmth to her chest that she tried to ignore. Thank you, she said simply. Samuel nodded, then changed the subject. The cattle drive to Denver leaves next week. I'll be gone for about 10 days. Virginia looked up sharply. You're going yourself. I always do. It's the biggest sale of the year. Nearly half our annual income comes from this drive. He smiled slightly. Don't worry. Jacob will be here and the ranch hands know to keep an eye on the property. You and Elizabeth will be perfectly safe. I'm not worried about our safety, Virginia said, though that wasn't entirely true. I was thinking about the accounts. There are decisions that might need to be made while you're gone. Then make them, Samuel said simply. I trust your judgment, Virginia. Those words, I trust your judgment, stayed with her long after Samuel left the office. How long had it been since anyone had trusted her that way? Her husband had loved her deeply, but even he had maintained certain traditional ideas about a woman's role and capabilities. Yet here was Samuel Crawford, handing her effective control of his business affairs without hesitation. The responsibility was both frightening and exhilarating. The night before Samuel was set to leave with the cattle drive, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it howling winds and driving rain that rattled the windows of the main house. Virginia sat in her sitting room, trying to focus on a novel Samuel had recommended, but her thoughts kept straying to the upcoming separation. 10 days suddenly seemed like an eternity. She'd grown accustomed to their evening discussions, to the sound of his boots on the porch when he returned from town, to the way his face lit up when Elizabeth reached for him with her tiny hands. This is dangerous, Virginia whispered to herself, closing the book. She was becoming too attached, too comfortable. She'd let down her guard, allowing Samuel Crawford to become important to her in ways that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect. A knock at her door interrupted these troubling thoughts. Virginia rose to answer it, expecting Mrs. Winters with her usual evening cup of tea. Instead, Samuel stood in the hallway, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I apologize for disturbing you so late, he said. I wanted to check that everything is secure in your rooms. This storm is worse than I anticipated. We're fine, Virginia assured him, gesturing to where Elizabeth slept peacefully in her crib, undisturbed by the weather's fury. The shutters are latched. Samuel nodded but made no move to leave. Virginia, there's something I should tell you before I go tomorrow. Her heart skipped a beat. Yes. If anything should happen while I'm away, anything at all, Jacob has instructions to take you and Elizabeth to my sister's place in Boulder. Sarah's husband is a judge there. They would keep you safe until my return. Virginia frowned. You're expecting trouble? No, Samuel said quickly. It's just a precaution. There have been rumors of cattle rustlers in the area, and sometimes they get bold when they know the ranch owner is away. He ran a hand through his hair. a gesture Virginia had come to recognize as a sign of concern. "It's probably nothing, but I'd rest easier knowing you have a plan." "We'll be fine," Virginia said, touched by his concern, "but thank you for thinking of us." Samuel held her gaze for a long moment. "I think of little else these days," he admitted softly. The quiet confession hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Virginia felt heat rise to her cheeks as she struggled to find an appropriate response. Before she could speak, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the house, causing the lights to flicker. Elizabeth stirred in her crib, whimpering softly. The moment broken, Virginia moved to soothe her daughter. When she looked up again, Samuel had composed himself, his expression once more that of the confident ranch owner and sheriff. "I should let you rest," he said. "We leave at first light." "Safe travels," Virginia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "We'll be here when you return." Samuel nodded, turning to go, then paused. "Virginia?" "Yes, thank you for bringing life back to this house." With that, he was gone, his footsteps receding down the hallway. Virginia closed the door slowly, leaning against it as her heart raced. What was happening between them? And more importantly, could she afford to let it continue? As she prepared for bed, lulled by the storm's symphony against the windows, Virginia admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Samuel Crawford. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful because Samuel was everything her late husband had been: kind, honorable, intelligent, and more. Terrifying because loving him meant risking her heart again, risking Elizabeth's future, risking the fragile peace they'd found. "One day at a time," Virginia whispered to herself as she drifted off to sleep. "That's all we can do, one day at a time." The cattle drive departed at dawn just as the storm was clearing. Virginia watched from the porch as Samuel mounted his horse, giving final instructions to the men staying behind. He caught her eye across the yard and tipped his hat in farewell, a gesture so quintessentially him that it brought a smile to her face despite her apprehension about his absence. As the dust from the departing herd settled, Virginia turned her attention to the tasks at hand. With Samuel gone, she took on additional responsibilities, consulting with Jacob about daily operations and making decisions that would normally wait for the ranch owner's approval. To her surprise, the ranch hands accepted her authority without question. "Boss says you're in charge of the books, madam," Jacob explained when she expressed astonishment at their ready compliance. "That means you speak for him when he's not here." The vote of confidence bolstered Virginia's resolve to prove worthy of Samuel's trust. She threw herself into her work with renewed dedication, refining the accounting system further and drafting plans for expanding the ranch's operations based on the promising figures from the last quarter. The days passed in a blur of productive activity. Elizabeth thrived in the stable environment, beginning to pull herself up on furniture and babbling constantly, as if trying to join the conversations around her. Mrs. Winters doted on the child shamelessly, declaring her the smartest baby in Colorado territory. Mark my words. On the 5th day after Samuel's departure, Virginia decided to sort through the correspondence that had accumulated in his absence. Most were routine business matters she could handle herself, but one letter caught her attention: an official-looking envelope from New Orleans, addressed to Sheriff Samuel Crawford. Virginia set it aside, intending to leave it for Samuel's return, but the New Orleans postmark nagged at her. What business would Samuel have with anyone in New Orleans? The coincidence seemed too great to ignore. After a night of restless sleep, Virginia made a decision. She couldn't open Samuel's personal correspondence, but she could ask Jacob if he knew anything about Samuel's connections to Louisiana. "New Orleans?" Jacob repeated when she raised the subject during their morning meeting. "Don't know about any business there, but the boss did make some inquiries about a plantation family a few months back. Bennett, I think the name was." Virginia felt the blood drain from her face. "Bennett." "You're certain?" Jacob nodded. "Pretty sure. Said he was looking into some trouble they'd had, something about a lynching. Virginia excused herself quickly, her mind racing. Samuel had been investigating her husband's murder without telling her, but why, and how had he even known to look into it? The answer came to her with stunning clarity. He'd known who she was from the beginning. That first night at the auction, when he'd intervened, it hadn't been random chance. Samuel had been looking for her. The realization sent Virginia into a panic. She returned to her rooms, pacing as she tried to make sense of it all. Was Samuel working with the men who'd killed her husband? Was this elaborate sanctuary nothing but a trap? No, that made no sense. If Samuel meant her harm, he'd had countless opportunities over the past weeks. And the letter, why would he receive correspondence about an investigation if he was part of the conspiracy? A more likely explanation formed in her mind. Samuel had somehow learned of her husband's murder and was seeking justice for him. But how? And why hadn't he told her? Virginia had no answers, only questions that multiplied with each passing hour. By nightfall, she'd worked herself into such a state of anxiety that Mrs. Winters noticed during dinner. "You're as jumpy as a jackrabbit," the housekeeper observed. "Is it Samuel being away?" "He'll be back in a few days, don't you worry." "It's not that," Virginia said, then hesitated. "Mrs. Winters, did Samuel ever mention anything to you about New Orleans? Or about my husband?" The older woman's expression grew guarded. "I think that's something you should discuss with Samuel when he returns." "So he did tell you something," Mrs. Winters sighed. "Virginia, dear, Samuel has his reasons for what he does, good reasons. Trust that if nothing else." The non-answer only deepened Virginia's unease. That night, after putting Elizabeth to bed, she made a difficult decision. If Samuel returned and his explanations weren't satisfactory, she would leave. The money she'd saved from her wages, combined with what remained of the funds she'd brought with her, would be enough to take them further west, perhaps all the way to California, where they might truly start fresh. The thought of leaving filled her with unexpected sorrow. Despite her reservations, the Crawford Ranch had become home in a way no place had since the plantation in Louisiana. The idea of saying goodbye to Mrs. Winters, to the comfortable rooms where Elizabeth had begun to flourish, to Samuel himself, it was almost unbearable. It might not come to that, Virginia told herself as she packed a small bag with essentials, just in case. There could be a perfectly reasonable explanation. 2 more days passed in tense anticipation. Virginia went through the motions of her daily routine, but her mind was constantly churning with possibilities, both reassuring and terrifying. On the afternoon of the 8th day, the sound of approaching horses drew her to the window. Her heart leaped when she recognized Samuel's tall figure among the returning riders, then immediately twisted with apprehension. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Virginia waited in the office, the mysterious letter from New Orleans placed prominently on the desk between them. When Samuel entered, his face lighting up at the sight of her, she steeled herself against the warmth that threatened to melt her resolve. "You're back early," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The sale went better than expected," Samuel replied, removing his hat. "We got top dollar for every head. Your projections were right on the money." He frowned slightly, noticing her stiff posture and the letter on the desk. "Is something wrong? You tell me," Virginia said, gesturing to the envelope. "You've been investigating my husband's murder without telling me." Samuel's expression shifted from confusion to resignation. He sighed deeply, setting his hat on a nearby shelf before taking a seat across from her. "Yes," he admitted, "I have been." "Why?" Virginia demanded, her voice tight with emotion. "How did you even know about it?" "Was finding me at that auction really a coincidence?" Samuel met her gaze directly. "No, it wasn't a coincidence. I'd been looking for you for nearly 2 months by then." The confirmation of her suspicions sent a chill through Virginia. "Explain, now." "Your husband's brother contacted me," Samuel said quietly. "William Bennett. We served together during the war. He saved my life at Gettysburg. When his brother was murdered and you disappeared with Elizabeth, he was frantic to find you." Virginia's mind reeled. William knew about Elizabeth. James told me his family had disowned him when he married me. Not William, Samuel corrected gently. He supported your marriage. He'd been searching for you himself, but after receiving threats, he realized he was being watched. So he reached out to me, knowing I was far from Louisiana and in a position to help. Why didn't you tell me this when we met? Virginia asked, her anger tinged now with confusion. Because you were terrified, Samuel said simply. You were running for your life, protecting your child. Would you have trusted me if I'd said I knew who you were? That I'd been looking for you? Virginia considered this, reluctantly acknowledging the truth in his words. Probably not, she conceded. But afterward? We've lived in the same house for nearly 2 months, Samuel. You've had plenty of opportunities to tell me the truth. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of discomfort. At first, I was waiting for you to feel safe enough, then, he hesitated. Then I was afraid of losing you, losing me, Virginia echoed. William wants you to return to New Orleans, Samuel explained. He's fighting for justice for James, and he believes having you and Elizabeth there would strengthen his case against the men responsible. He's managed to get the attention of federal authorities. Virginia stood abruptly, moving to the window. Return to New Orleans, where they murdered my husband and tried to kill my child. Never. That's what I told him, Samuel said quietly. I promised to find you to ensure you were safe, but I wouldn't force you to go back. He rose, moving to stand behind her, though he didn't touch her. The letter you found, it's from William. He's identified all the men involved in James's murder. 3 have been arrested. The others are being sought. Virginia turned to face him, searching his expression for any sign of deception. She found none, only the same steady honesty that had drawn her to him from the beginning. Why continue the deception once you knew I was safe? She asked, her voice softer now. Why not tell me about William, about the progress of the investigation? Samuel's gaze dropped briefly before meeting hers again. Because I fell in love with you, he said simply. I didn't plan to. When William asked for my help, I agreed out of loyalty to him, nothing more. But then I met you, saw your courage, your intelligence, your devotion to Elizabeth, and everything changed. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Virginia's heart raced as the implications settled over her. You feared I would leave, she realized aloud. If I knew justice was being served, that Elizabeth and I might eventually be safe in Louisiana again. Samuel nodded. It was selfish, unforgivable, really. I should have told you everything from the start. Yes, you should have, Virginia agreed. She took a deep breath, weighing her next words carefully. But I understand why you didn't. Relief flickered across Samuel's face, quickly replaced by caution. You do. Fear makes us do things we wouldn't otherwise consider, Virginia said softly. I've made my share of mistakes out of fear these past months. She gestured to the small bag visible through the open door to her sitting room, including packing to leave tonight if your explanation wasn't satisfactory. Samuel's gaze followed her gesture, his expression tightening at the sight of the packed bag. And is my explanation satisfactory? Virginia considered the question seriously. Samuel had deceived her, yes. But his deception had been born of the same protective instinct that had driven her to flee Louisiana with Elizabeth, the desperate need to safeguard what he loved. I need to read William's letter, she said finally. And I need your word that from now on, there will be no more secrets between us. None, you have it, Samuel promised immediately. Complete honesty in all things, Virginia nodded, moving back to the desk to pick up the letter. Then yes, your explanation is satisfactory, but Samuel? Yes. If you ever keep something like this from me again, I will leave. No matter what I feel for you, Elizabeth and I have survived too much to build a life on anything less than absolute trust. Samuel's eyes widened slightly at the implicit acknowledgement of her feelings. What you feel for me, he repeated carefully. Virginia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Yes. And what is that exactly? Samuel asked, a tentative hope in his voice that made her heart ache. Virginia took a step toward him, then another, until they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I think you know," she said softly. "It's the same thing that made me so afraid when I found this letter. The same thing that makes the thought of leaving here so painful." Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand came to rest gently against her cheek. "Say it," he whispered. "Please." Virginia leaned into his touch, allowing herself to embrace the truth she'd been fighting for weeks. "I love you, Samuel, despite my best efforts not to." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm, brilliant and warming. "I love you too, Virginia, more than I thought possible." When he bent to kiss her, Virginia met him halfway, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless when they finally parted. "What happens now?" Virginia asked, her forehead resting against his. "That depends on you," Samuel replied. "We can write to William together, let him know you're safe after that. Whatever you want, Virginia. If you wish to return to Louisiana eventually, I'll go with you. If you want to stay here, nothing would make me happier." Virginia considered her options, truly free to choose for the first time since her husband's death. "I want to stay," she said finally. "But I also want Elizabeth to know her father's family. Perhaps William could visit us here," Samuel nodded. "I'm sure he would. He's just as stubborn as you are." Virginia laughed, the sound startling them both with its lightness. How long had it been since she'd laughed like that freely, without restraint? "There's something else," Samuel said, his expression growing serious again. "Something I've wanted to ask since the day you agreed to stay on as my bookkeeper." Virginia raised an eyebrow. "Another secret, Sheriff Crawford?" "No," Samuel smiled. "A question, one I've been afraid to ask." He took her hands in his. "Virginia Bennett, would you consider becoming Virginia Crawford? Would you marry me?" The proposal, though not entirely unexpected after their declarations, still took Virginia's breath away. Marriage meant permanence, commitment, a new beginning for her and Elizabeth. "Samuel, are you certain?" she asked. "People will talk. A white sheriff marrying a widow with a mixed-race child, let them talk," Samuel interrupted firmly. "I've never cared much for other people's opinions, and I'm not about to start now." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "I love you, Virginia. I love Elizabeth as if she were my own. I want to build a life with you both if you'll have me." Virginia looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and love reflected there. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a tentative hope for the future. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Crawford." His face lit up with joy as he pulled her into another embrace, lifting her slightly off her feet in his enthusiasm. Virginia laughed again, wrapping her arms around his neck. "When?" Samuel asked when he set her down. "How soon can you be ready?" Virginia pretended to consider. "Well, I should probably read William's letter first, and unpack that bag, and explain to Elizabeth that she's gaining a father." Samuel's expression softened at the mention of Elizabeth. "She's too young to understand now, but I promise you, Virginia, I'll be the best father I can be to her. She'll never doubt she's loved." "I know," Virginia said simply, because she did know. She'd seen it in the way he looked at Elizabeth, in the wooden toys he'd carved for her, in the stories he read when he thought Virginia wasn't listening. As if summoned by their discussion, Elizabeth's voice carried from the next room, awake from her nap and calling for her mother in her limited vocabulary. "Perfect timing," Virginia said with a smile. "Come meet your future daughter properly." Hand in hand, they walked to Elizabeth's room, where the little girl stood in her crib, bouncing excitedly at the sight of them. When Samuel lifted her into his arms, she patted his bearded face with her tiny hands, a gesture of complete trust that brought tears to Virginia's eyes. In that moment, watching the man she loved hold her daughter with such tenderness, Virginia finally accepted what her heart had known for weeks. She was home. Not in a place, but in the love of this good man who had promised that no one would ever hurt them again and had kept that promise in ways she was only beginning to understand. The following Sunday, Virginia stood nervously in Mrs. Winter's bedroom, examining her reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress, a simple but elegant creation of pale blue silk, had been a gift from Samuel, delivered by the town dressmaker just yesterday. It was his mother's, Mrs. Winters explained as she adjusted the fit. Sarah, his sister, kept it all these years, hoping he'd find someone worthy to wear it. And she doesn't mind, Virginia asked, running her hands over the delicate fabric. That it's me, Mrs. Winters snorted. That girl has been trying to get her brother married off for a decade. She'd welcome the devil himself if Samuel loved him. She patted Virginia's shoulder. Besides, she's coming to the wedding, wouldn't do that if she objected. The wedding. The word still sent butterflies through Virginia's stomach. After their engagement, Samuel had suggested waiting, giving Virginia time to adjust to the idea. It was Virginia who had insisted on a swift ceremony. I've wasted enough time being afraid, she'd told him. I don't want to waste another day. And so, barely a week after his proposal, Virginia found herself preparing to become Mrs. Samuel Crawford in a small ceremony at the ranch. Pastor Matthews from the Silver Creek Church had agreed to officiate, though not without some initial hesitation that disappeared remarkably quickly after a private conversation with Samuel. Almost ready, Mrs. Winters asked, breaking into Virginia's thoughts. The guests are arriving, guests. The word brought another flutter of anxiety. Samuel had insisted on doing things properly, inviting not only his sister and her husband from Boulder, but also several townspeople he considered friends, Dr. and Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Parker from the millinery, even Mayor Wilson and his wife. What if they're unkind? Virginia had worried. What if they refuse to attend? Then they're not welcome at the Crawford Ranch, Samuel had replied simply. But give them a chance, Virginia. People might surprise you. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Jacob's wife, Martha, carrying Elizabeth in her arms. The baby was dressed in a tiny white dress with blue ribbons that matched Virginia's gown. This little miss is ready for her mama's big day, Martha announced, passing Elizabeth to Virginia. And looking as pretty as a picture. Virginia kissed her daughter's chubby cheek, drawing strength from the child's innocent joy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, she, Elizabeth, and Samuel, a family bonded by choice rather than blood. I'm ready, Virginia said, adjusting Elizabeth on her hip. Let's not keep the groom waiting. The small procession made its way downstairs and through the house to the back garden, where Samuel had arranged for the ceremony to take place. As Virginia stepped onto the porch, she gasped softly at the transformation. Lanterns hung from the trees, their gentle light supplementing the late afternoon sun. Rows of chairs faced a simple arch twined with wildflowers, beneath which stood Pastor Matthews and Samuel, handsome in a black suit she'd never seen him wear before. But it was the faces turned toward her that truly took Virginia's breath away. Every chair was filled, with more guests standing at the back, not just the invited friends, but ranch hands and their families, shopkeepers from town, even a few faces she recognized as having been less than welcoming during her visits to Silver Creek. Told you people might surprise you, Mrs. Winters whispered, following Virginia's stunned gaze. Samuel Crawford is respected in these parts. If he says you're worthy, folks tend to listen. As Virginia moved down the makeshift aisle, Elizabeth secure in her arms, she met Samuel's eyes. The love and pride she saw there washed away the last of her nervousness. This man, this good, honorable man, had chosen her, just as she had chosen him. Whatever the world might throw at them, they would weather it together. When she reached his side, Samuel took her free hand, squeezing it gently before turning to face Pastor Matthews. The ceremony was simple and traditional, the words familiar yet newly meaningful as Virginia spoke her vows clearly, promising to love and honor the man beside her for all the days of their lives. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. Elizabeth, caught between them, patted both their faces, drawing laughter from the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pastor Matthews announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Crawford and their daughter, Elizabeth, their daughter." The simple acknowledgement of what had already become true in their hearts made the moment complete. As they turned to face their guests, Virginia was overwhelmed by the warmth of the reception, the smiles, the applause, the genuine congratulations offered by people who had once eyed her with suspicion. The celebration continued into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the lantern-lit garden. Virginia found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, gradually realizing that many had come not merely out of respect for Samuel, but out of genuine curiosity about the woman who had captured the heart of Silver Creek's most eligible bachelor. "You've made quite an impression on this town," Samuel murmured when he finally reclaimed her for a dance, Elizabeth having been whisked away by his sister Sarah for some aunt and niece bonding time. "I've hardly left the ranch," Virginia protested. Samuel smiled. "Word gets around. Your suggestions for the school fund, the improvements to the ranch's profits, the way you stood up to Johnson and his cronies in the general store, people notice these things. And they approve?" Virginia asked skeptically. "Some do, some don't," Samuel acknowledged, "but more will in time. Change comes slowly out here, but it does come." He pulled her closer as they swayed to the music. "Besides, I didn't marry you for their approval." Virginia rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "No, why did you marry me then?" "Because you're the strongest, most intelligent, most beautiful woman I've ever known," Samuel replied without hesitation. "Because I love you more than I thought possible. Because the thought of spending even one day without you and Elizabeth is unbearable." Virginia looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "I love you, Samuel Crawford. And I love you, Virginia Crawford." He bent to kiss her, a brief, sweet gesture that promised more later when they were alone. As the celebration continued around them, Virginia allowed herself to fully embrace the happiness she'd found. The future would bring challenges, she knew. There would be those who never accepted their family, who looked at Elizabeth and saw only what made her different. But for every closed mind, there would be an open heart like Samuel's, like Mrs. Winter's, like the surprising number of people who had come today to wish them well. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Elizabeth slept peacefully in her crib, Virginia stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, gazing up at the star-filled Colorado sky. Samuel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pulling her against his chest. "Happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Virginia leaned into his embrace, covering his hands with hers. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good," Samuel murmured. "Because this is just the beginning, Virginia. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Our whole lives." The words filled Virginia with a sense of possibility she hadn't felt since before James's death. A future to build, a child to raise, a love to nurture, all within reach now, no longer just distant dreams. "No one will ever hurt you again," Samuel had promised that first night at the auction. Looking back, Virginia realized he had kept that promise in ways both large and small, not just protecting her and Elizabeth from physical harm, but creating a space where their hearts could heal, where they could love without fear. As Samuel led her back inside, to the bedroom they would now share as husband and wife, Virginia silently renewed her own promise to love this man with everything she had, to build a life worthy of the gift he had given her, to never again let fear dictate her choices. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world with all its judgments and dangers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight belonged to them alone, a beginning, a promise, a love strong enough to heal the wounds of the past and brave enough to face whatever the future might hold. 5 years later, Virginia stood on the porch of the Crawford ranch house, watching as Samuel lifted their son onto his first pony. At 3 years old, James William Crawford was the spitting image of his father, from his bright blue eyes to the determined set of his jaw as he gripped the saddle horn. "Not too fast," Virginia called, though she knew her caution was unnecessary. Samuel would sooner cut off his own arm than allow any harm to come to their children. "We're just going to walk around the corral, Mama," 8-year-old Elizabeth called from atop her own mare. "Papa says I can show Jamie how it's done." Virginia smiled at her daughter, heart swelling with pride. Elizabeth had blossomed in these 5 years, growing from a timid baby into a confident, intelligent child who held her mixed heritage as a badge of honor rather than a burden. Her skin was darker than her half-brother's, her curls tighter, but her smile was pure Crawford wide and uninhibited, just like her adoptive father's. Samuel had legally adopted Elizabeth on their first anniversary, though as he said at the time, "This just makes official what's been true in my heart since the day I met her." The adoption had raised eyebrows in some quarters, but by then, the Crawfords' position in Silver Creek society was too firmly established for anyone to openly object. Virginia's work with the ranch accounts had expanded into a broader role managing several businesses in town, including the new hotel and the expanded general store. Samuel had encouraged her every step of the way, proud of her growing reputation as one of the territory's sharpest business minds. "Mrs. Crawford," a voice called, drawing Virginia's attention to the approaching rider. It was Jacob, now the foreman of the much-expanded Crawford Ranch. "Telegram from Boulder." Virginia accepted the yellow paper, immediately recognizing the name of the sender. "It's from William," she told Samuel as he led the children's ponies back toward the barn, having completed their riding lesson. Samuel lifted Jamie from the saddle before helping Elizabeth dismount. "Good news, I hope?" Virginia scanned the brief message, a smile spreading across her face. "The best. They're coming for Christmas, all of them, William, his wife, and the children." This would be the third visit from Virginia's brother-in-law and his family since that first tentative reunion 4 years ago. The initial meeting had been emotional, filled with memories of James and regrets about lost time, but it had also been healing. William had brought photographs of Virginia's first husband, precious mementos she had thought lost forever in the fire that destroyed their Louisiana home. "Elizabeth looks just like him around the eyes," William had said, studying his niece with obvious affection. "He would be so proud of her, of both of you." The visits had become a cherished tradition, bridging Virginia's past with her present in a way that honored all she had lost while celebrating all she had found. "We'll need to prepare the guest rooms," Virginia said now, already mentally listing the arrangements necessary for hosting their extended family. "And Jamie will need new clothes, he's grown so much since they saw him last." Samuel chuckled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "One thing at a time, love. Christmas is still 2 months away." Virginia leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steady presence as she had countless times over the years. "You're right, of course, it's just, you want everything to be perfect," Samuel finished for her. "I know. But they're family. They don't expect perfect. Family." The word still filled Virginia with wonder sometimes. From the frightened widow hiding her baby's face at an auction, she had become the heart of a thriving family and community respected, loved, secure in a way she had once thought impossible. "Mama, can we decorate the tree with red ribbons this year?" Elizabeth asked, her mind already jumping ahead to Christmas preparations. "Uncle William said red is traditional in New Orleans." "I think that sounds lovely," Virginia agreed, smoothing a hand over her daughter's dark curls. "Perhaps we can start a new tradition that combines the old and the new." Samuel lifted Jamie onto his shoulders, the boy's delighted giggles filling the air. "Speaking of new, Mrs. Winters mentioned something about apple pie for dessert tonight. Who's hungry?" "Me," both children chorused. As they moved toward the house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, Virginia took a moment to savor the scene her husband and children silhouetted against the golden light, the solid comfort of the home they had built together. the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new joys. She thought of that night at the auction, when a desperate plan had brought her to Silver Creek. She thought of Samuel's words, "No one will ever hurt you again," and how that promise had expanded to encompass so much more than physical protection. It had become the foundation of their life together, a commitment to create a sanctuary where love could flourish without fear. "Coming, Virginia?" Samuel called from the porch, Jamie still perched on his shoulders while Elizabeth danced ahead into the house. "Yes," Virginia replied, quickening her steps to join them. "I'm right here." And she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the family that had found her when she least expected it but needed it most. The journey had been long and often painful, but standing here now, Virginia knew she wouldn't change a single step that had led her home.